Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you here tonight on such a really brisk evening. I'm Jean James, President of the Canberra Jung Society. If you don't know me, I think nearly everybody does know me, who I am. Thank you for joining us together here at MacKillop House and online. And thank you, Robbie, for your beautiful music. Let us first acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respect to the elders, past, present and emerging. This evening, we're delighted to welcome back our guest speaker, a long-standing friend, Carolyn Minchin. Tonight, Carolyn will be talking with us on the subject of Spiritus Contra Spiritum, literally translated as spirit against spirit. Spiritus in Latin means both alcoholic beverages and the highest religious experience. Carl Jung played a unique role in the emergence of Alcoholic Anonymous through a series of conversations with A&A founder Bill Wilson, addressing the importance of spiritual awareness in the recovery journey. Carolyn will explore the rich heritage of the 12-step movement and the perspectives Jung brought to the early days of A&A with his statement, Spiritus Contra Spiritum. She will link her journey of awareness and spiritual growth around the impact of alcohol in her own family with the archetype of the Ouroboros, a new sculpture by Zen artist Jenny Lee, commissioned to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the National Art Gallery. Carolyn is a graduate of education at the University of Canberra and a Master of Social Work at Charles Sturt University. As a volunteer, Carolyn works to build a bridge between Indigenous practice, wisdom, and evidence-based practice, and is training in a behavioural approach to therapy with people at risk of suicide and self-harm. Following Carolyn's presentation, we'll have a short break, it's at about 9:15, 20 past, something like that, and resume for discussion and questions, finishing by 10 p.m. Note that we'll be recording this event for later reference. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted while Carolyn is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments and we'll open up later for discussion. Thank you very much, Carolyn. It's great to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate everyone coming here. This is very experiential, work in progress kind of a.
It's off. What do you want to know?
This one? That's okay. That'd be all. Kind of an exploration. So I'm working as an addiction counsellor part-time, and for the last 6 months, I've gone much more deeply into both spiritual practice and addressing I guess kind of making peace with the way that alcohol's been handed down and the disruption that's caused in the family heritage. So it's both sides kind of come together in this, like a weaving of professional and personal. So that can create quite a vulnerable space, I guess. And I think in addiction counselling, pretty much it's a space where everyone who works there has been touched by it or suffered from it in some way. And then there are ways also of seeing addiction as going beyond the substance and into behaviour and into consumerism and the way that we are as social beings as well. So the ways that I've been, particularly in the last 6 months, been practicing reflection on this, are very much kind of making peace with the past and getting a balance of the personal and professional. So it's really sharing with you of some of the reflective practices that have informed that journey. Next one. So this is Carl Jung and the Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the source of looking at Spiritual Journey and Individuation by McCabe. And I've also brought in some of the work of Father Bill, who's reflecting on this work, coming back to the spirit against spirit, that holding space. If we could just have the next slide. That's good. Sorry, we just need to work out how to change the slides from it. Sorry. So in terms of how I've worked with this phrase, spirit against spirit, I've come to a point of seeing a metaphorical approach as the most useful and linking this to the archetype of the Ouroboros and linking to the image. Sorry about this pause here, but it is kind of quite karmic in a way, I think, because this is sort of almost what I'm exactly trying to explain, that there's a pause when it comes to addiction recovery. There's a place where the next step forward seems impossible to find. A step backwards is impossible. And finding the capacity to be still in the moment and to be able to be with exactly what is in the moment is the challenge in recovery. So Kelly Wilson is one of the contemporary psychologists who's written in a way that links acceptance and commitment therapy to the 12 steps. So this is where I sit professionally in terms of the way I approach in terms of evidence-based practice. So Kelly Wilson's been incredibly brave as an American psychologist who did experience time in a psych ward for alcoholism before he started his career. And so he brings this capacity to be able to put together that experience and come out openly about his personal knowledge of recovery and his scientific approach. But Kelly Wilson starts the prologue of The Wisdom to Know the Difference, saying, "You are not alone. I know the depths to which addiction can take a person, and I know something about recovery. I know it personally, and I know it as a scientist, a therapist, a researcher. Woven into this book will be the sensibilities science has to offer to the recovering person, but also small bits and pieces of my own path in recovery, and finally, stories I've heard along the way. The recovery process has been slow at times, even slower than baby steps. The best thing I've done some days was to sit on my hands. I've learned to appreciate even those days. If I'm sitting on my hands, it's very hard to make much mess to clean up later." So this is where we are with contemporary behavioural psychology, and this book unpacks exactly how the 12 steps sit with acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a mindfulness-based approach, and an approach that develops increasing capacity to be able to access psychological flexibility and choice and decision-making, and moving forward according to values. There's a slide at the start I just missed, but I can briefly go over that. So just had a request when we have a discussion later, just to respect the tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous as an anonymous safe place. I'd appreciate it if we can share personal experiences and not talk about what happens in 12-step meetings. So this talk is very much more about how do we look at how this insight from Jung on the unconscious, on the capacity to sit with what is and to build a sense of space and awareness of how that feeds into our ability to bring balance and stability within whether it's within the field of addiction or in therapy or in our personal lives. The other invitation I have is we'll be talking about the Zen sculpture by Lindy Lee, the Ouroboros at the National Gallery, and this sorry, can we have the next slide? So tomorrow morning, I'm putting out an invitation for people if they want to be able to experience the sense of what this is, the metaphor of the snake biting its own tail, of the containing of the medicine, of being able to sit with what is that sense of the archetype of, I guess, of medicine and containment and cosmic spaciousness and alignment and belonging that comes through so beautifully in Lindy Lee's work. There'll be an opportunity tomorrow morning if anyone wants to come along at 10 o'clock to do a reflection at the actual sculpture. So this is AA and Carl Jung, The Hero's Journey, The 12 Steps to Wholeness by Father Bill W. So this is a series of reflections on the concept of what is it, trying to explore what it is that this spiritual awareness or experience that Bill W., the founder of AA, was in dialogue and writing to about with Carl Jung in the early days. So it's 90 years old, the Alcoholics Anonymous tradition. And it's quite extraordinary in that with all the advancements in therapy that we've had, the peer support structure for anyone who doesn't have the funds or the ability to access hospitals or rehabs, the free structure that's out there hasn't changed in its approach in 90 years. And it's very much based on this powerful notion of spiritual transformation through acknowledging, accepting what is and moving towards what can be done to ameliorate, to realign with the cosmic, and to become aware of the subconscious processes at heart within the addiction, etc. So there's a part here. Thank you. So I think that's a good spot to kind of get that sense of that it's up to all of us. It's really an important thing not to be separating out and see people with addictions as over there and separate, and to be able to look at the subtlety of the way that this plays out socially, and to embrace that sense of that experience, the tension of that moment where there's a choice between going down an addictive pathway, and for that, many of us, that can be thinking, it can be a behavior, it can be lots of different ways that shows up, or being able to create that extra spaciousness, that extra kind of sense of connection or capacity to sit with what is, capacity to be with other people in community. And there's that beautiful kind of contradiction there of the differentiation, the importance of showing up as ourselves, as unique, as well as being able to connect with the whole. And there's one thing that Father Bill, in that analysis of the early dialogue between 12-step and Carl Jung, he talks about how the Alcoholics Anonymous has evolved some sayings where they talk about the ego in quite a negative way. They have this phrase, edging God out for ego, that the ego is something that we need to put aside in recovery. Carl Jung, I think, has something really important to offer in that space, in that the ego is a part of us. as well. And it's an important thing to be able to nurture, particularly when people are in that vulnerable space in early recovery and coming into detox or rehab. So Carl Jung has this image of the ego as the cork bobbing on the ocean. And I like to think it's important to be able to nurture that sense of self and ego. And it's hard enough to be just a small cork bobbing on an enormous ocean, if we look at it in cosmic terms. It's a hard enough experience. And I think it's very important for us as workers in the addiction field to have that respect for the way that the person is bobbing as they come through the recovery journey, for the way that their ego is protecting them at that point, and for the things that they need to express and the way they need to differentiate themselves when they're coming into a program of recovery. So the importance of being able to voice how people feel and what people see as the journey forward is a really important skill. If we can have the next one, we'll just go on to, it's the image of the Ouroboros. So this is the snake. So there's a sense of mystery, I think, in stepping into this. There's this sense of the archetype of this image, and this appears in Zen traditions as well. It's that moment of stopping, that moment of being able to contain what is. You can go to the next. I think that's another image there. And I think the next one is that Canberra sculpture. So this is the new, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. I think I've had a couple of visits here, one this morning, and there's quite an extraordinary sense of capacity to step in and shift perspective and to be able to look at things in a different way in stepping into this work. So Lindy Lee talks about how she will receive all the reflections of life. For me, this work is about cosmos. Belonging is everything. Everybody under the heavens belongs. So this was unearthed recently on October the 25th. So that's the invitation if anyone's around tomorrow at 10 o'clock, or if anyone wants to go at another time. This is the invitation, is to be able to sit with that sense of taking in other perspectives, taking in the cosmos, taking in that sense of being the individuated self within the broader cosmos, and being able to step into that place where it's hard to see from here, but there's an extraordinary play of perspective when we walk into this work. And then there's something quite extraordinary about the way that it holds the light and the energy, that I think at dusk and at dawn, it will be quite an amazing thing to see as well, because of the way that the materials take on the reflections. It's out the front. Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's only since February 25th that the fences have come down, so it's only just visible. Yeah.
And actually, I must say that there's a group of us who've decided after this meeting tonight that we're going to look at it.
Fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Synchronicity, hey?
I think evening would be a really lovely time, and I've seen some of them. Mm.
Yeah, but why did we decide tonight?
Fabulous.
Synchronicity.
Oh, that's fantastic. So,
Thank you.
yeah, no, that's okay. So this might seem like a leap too from the spirit against spirit. but to me, like I could go in a lot to the details of the early days of the 12-step movement and trace back. You can look back and see the influence of the Oxford movement and the Christian morality and the rejuvenation of the spirituality through there. There were several other figures who came in and played important parts in Bill's journey at different times. There was this very significant letter from Carl Jung talking about the spirit against the spirit. Possible to get a bit lost in the detail with looking at how AA evolved and all the different dynamics too of how it played out as peer support back in the day, 90 years ago, when there wasn't an understanding of how people weren't able to just stop taking a substance. There wasn't an understanding of detox like we have today. There weren't pathways for rehabilitation. This was back at a time, and the deaths in the family that we experienced in my own family back a couple of generations, this would have been a time 90 years ago that none of these groups would have been available in Australia at that time. So there's this huge struggle comes through in the early literature of the 12-step movement. And it kind of struck me that it's this sense of holding and containment that you get with the Ouroboros. I can't think of another way to really describe it, and I can't think of a gentler and more joyful way to step into a spiritual practice as well. Just to be able to do that perspective shift. And I've always been a really strong advocate as well for atheists in AA and for people who don't have an understanding of God in the way that Father W described it just then. I think the beauty of this kind of spiritual practice is that it is accessible even if people don't have a particular religion or an approach to a belief or faith. It's a kind of a way of stepping out and doing something beyond the addiction that creates space and creates new ways of working and doesn't require a particular belief other than being willing to see beyond to the self, to protect the self, to think of the self as that small body bobbing on the ocean, and to take in that wonder and that beauty of that broader space beyond. So thanks. Next one. So my personal journey, so the acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behaviour therapy, integrating harm minimisation and abstinence approaches, that's all very much my professional journey as a addiction counsellor. My personal journey has been over a couple of decades of being able to stop and take stock of the impact of alcohol on myself and within my family. And ordinary recovery is one of the most beautiful descriptions of 12-step. This is based on Zen practice. William Alexander's work, Co-order Alcoholism, Mindfulness and Ordinary Recovery. And Alexander talks about alcoholism is the disease of living elsewhere. In active addiction, the present moment is a terrible and threatening place. The remorse for things done and the fear of what is to come crowd the eternal wholly now into oblivion. So just sitting with the reality of that, and I think that leads back a bit to Kelly Wilson's work as well. It's that fear and real psychological, spiritual isolation that people experience when they stop, and I have experienced this at different points in my life as well. Is that moment of stopping and allowing for something new to happen, allowing for something else to come in that can be quite confronting. And it's at that point where there's a really strong responsibility on the part of counsellors and in supervision structures to be able to really bring a huge amount of empathy, kindness, compassion, patience to the steps that people take when they go through any experience of letting go of an addictive substance. Next one. So I'll go through I think there was another page. Yep, I'll go through the references a bit. Again, there's a couple of books here that have been really influential for me. And actually, there's a couple of sections here in, particularly in Ernest Kurtz's Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is worth unpacking a bit if we have the time. Is that how we're going for time, Robert? This is so in the book Not God, and I hang on to this book because I think that it's that awareness of being able to stop, be contained within the self, and be able to imagine something beyond the self. That's one of the essential things, that choosing a higher power, choosing some other force to be able to think about and look at things from a different perspective. It's one of the big powerful things in Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's this quite extraordinary moment in Bill W., the founder of AA's. His life was not a straight trajectory by any means. Once he did give up alcohol, there were several, I think about 4 times when he experienced relapse and getting the support to get back on track. I think this is quite poignant, this meeting. With a Jesuit priest. So Bill, at this point, despite their best efforts, Bill and his wife Lois have lost their house. It would seem that on a chill, rain-pelting early winter evening in late 1940, as Wilson almost tangibly felt himself being wrapped ever more tightly in a gloomy pall of spiritual darkness, he sat forlorn in the sparsely furnished clubhouse rooms in which he and Lois were then living. Disconsolate, his former way of escape, alcohol, forever denied, Wilson nursed his many shattered hopes and recent stinging disappointments in self-pitying and frustrating ravery. Just then, when he was at the very nadir of that abyss, a veritable gleam of light came literally knocking at the door, as Bill's morose meditations were suddenly interrupted by the building's janitor. Someone downstairs wanted to see Wilson. So this turned out to be Father Edward Dowling, introduced himself as a Jesuit priest from St. Louis, who as editor of a Catholic publication was interested in the parallels he intuited between the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and the exercises of St. Ignatius, the spiritual disciple of his Jesuit order. That he showed delight rather than disappointment when Wilson wearily confessed his ignorance of the exercise, at once endeared the diminutive cleric to Bill. So I think that's an interesting moment because it shows there is an archetypal pattern in the steps as well, and the Canadian Centre for Addictions talks about in simplistic language there's this step of honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, love, responsibility, discipline, spiritual awareness, and service as an archetype that moves through many different religious traditions. Dowling shuffled across the room and sat down in the shabbier of the room's 2 decrepit chairs, balancing his cane across his knee. As they began to converse, Bill noticed that his visitor's round face seemed to gather in all the light in the room and then reflected it directly at him. The priest wasted little time on small talk. His very tone of voice pulled Wilson out of himself, but it soon became clear that Dowling was ready to do more than merely listen. That evening, Father Ed began sharing with Wilson an understanding of the spiritual life that then and subsequently seemed to always speak to Bill's condition. Not since his earliest days in the Oxford group had Wilson himself felt himself in the loving presence of such a receptive listener. So I think this talks really up to the point of what's needed from society to be able to contain and meet effectively the needs of people in recovery. Then Bill had unburdened himself, especially to Eddie, but it was only now as this evening with Father Dowling Dowling wore on, that the man who had written AA's fifth step had come to feel himself finally taking his fifth step. He told Dowling not only what he had done and left undone, he went on to share with his new sponsor the thoughts and feelings behind those actions and omissions. He told of his high hopes and plans, and he spoke also about his anger, despair, and mounting frustrations. The Jesuit listened and quoted Matthew, "Blessed are they who do hunger and thirst." God's chosen, he pointed out, were always distinguished by their yearnings, their restlessness, and their thirst. So this comes back to one of the initial insights from Carl Jung, the connection between the yearning for spirituality and the addiction and the replacement of the substance. In pain, Bill asked if there were ever any satisfaction. The priest almost snapped back. Never, never any. He continued in a gentler tone, describing as divine dissatisfaction that which would keep Wilson going, always reaching out for unattainable goals, for only by so reaching would he attain what, hidden from him, were God's goals. This acceptance that his dissatisfaction, that his very thirst, could be divine, was one of Dowling's great gifts to Bill Wilson and through him to Alcoholics Anonymous. Another was to prove less happy from the Jesuits' own point of view. Bill talked about his own difficulties in prayer and his continuing problem in conveying the meaning of his spiritual experience to other alcoholics. There was a move afoot within the fellowship just then, he told Dowling, to change that phrase in the 12th step to spiritual awakening. It seemed to Bill an attempt to mask rather than to clarify the role of the divine in the alcoholic salvation. Tartly, Father Ed offered a succinct response. If you can name it, it's not God. And I think that is that moment where we get at least some glimpse into the pain of the movement out of recovery and the paradox of that changing of direction, shifting of focus, moving back into society, and knowing that our best thinking at that point is not necessarily going to be the way forward. So hence that struggle in AA with the slogans and sayings and with the acknowledgement of the paradox of being able to, not being able to think one's way beyond the paradox of an addiction, particularly once it becomes clear that there's this layer of addiction in the thinking that continues to go on within family systems even once the substance has been removed. Years later, Wilson would paraphrase the extension back to Dowling as a partial explanations of his difficulties accepting the Catholic faith. So that's just some of the complexity of this struggle that moves through the early 12-step movement, and coming back to some of those early insights, the thirst for something different, for something more, that can often get derailed into substance use. I'll just finish off with a quote from William Alexander again in Cool Water, Alcoholism, Mindfulness and Ordinary Recovery. So this is more from a Zen perspective. The hungry ghost is never satisfied. That is his nature. In Buddhism, the hungry ghost is a creature with a vast and empty body and a tiny throat. He's always hungry and never satisfied. In the hungry ghost realm, you are with the enraptured, in the words of Chogyam Trungpa, by the process of expanding, becoming rich, consuming. We insist on more. This is the nation of the biggest, the newest and the best. And in the process, we eat up the earth's resources at a discouraging rate. And just as dangerous, we leave lives of rationalization and rapture. Putting down the drug or putting the cork in the bottle is only the beginning of sobriety. Bill Wilson said of AA, we operate a spiritual kindergarten. When the booze disappears, another substance will appear to sustain the rapture. If the substances fail, behaviours will surface. Absent behaviours, compulsive thought patterns will arise. One can drown in one's own self-importance. A attachment to anything seems preferable to the ongoing process of letting go. So that's just a summary. If we can go back perhaps to the image in the previous. Just a word of encouragement in that ongoing process of letting go, and in whatever way that looks like for you, and bringing in that joy of the sense of connection with the universe, being part of something greater, and also holding that sense of self that Carl Jung talked about, that bobbing cork on the ocean, holding that sense of self gently and with deep compassion for ourselves and others. Thank you.